Benjamin Beard, welcome back. It's been like 2.5, 3 years since we talked. I don't know how the hell that happened. I apologize because I enjoy our conversations. And we're going to have one today that was inspired by you and the book that you wrote that was one of our first or earlier talks. The South Never Plays Itself. I still have my uncorrected proof here. Um, in that book, you talked about a lot of films that are centered around the South and sort of the conversations around them and the interpretations of them and the interpretations of the film on the South, of the South, I should say. And one of the films that was mentioned in there was Gone with the Wind. And I have never seen Victor Fleming's Gone with the Wind, or at least I hadn't up until about 5 days ago. So I thought it'd be a perfect opportunity to finally catch up with you, talk to somebody about this film. Why not start with an expert? Yeah, we'll get into it. First of all, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, and thanks for having me back. And yeah, I've missed you. I've kind of been keeping track of your ascent and career a little bit, and we know some people in common now. So I've been kind of, sort of seeing how you were doing. But yeah, I it's been too long.
Yeah. Well, and we'll talk about the future of conversations coming up. I don't want to give away too much here at the beginning. We'll talk about it at the end, but you've got a new book forthcoming that's very exciting. We'll talk about some future movies. But yeah, Victor Fleming's Gone with the Wind. Why am I bringing this up now? Well, I'll just give you the short version of a very long, boring story.
Okay.
But my wife and I, back in 2004, we got married in a movie theater, the Pickwick Theatre in Park Ridge, Illinois. And they announced at the end of last year they were closing after being open for a very, very long time. And they were planning to go out with a screening on their big mega screen. It's like an old movie palace, but they've got nice seats now and like the same huge screen. They're going to show Gone with the Wind because that was the first movie they screened at that theater, and they wanted it to be the last. So, me being corny and tied to, anniversary dates and milestones, I thought, hey, let's go see Gone with the Wind because my wife and I, neither of us had seen it. So we played hooky last Thursday. We went to go see it. Fortunately, the Pickwick has recently announced that they have found new ownership. So they're going to do a big reopening. So the theater will go on, as will my memories of Gone with the Wind, because I was floored by this movie. I knew absolutely nothing about it aside from the iconic poster, the classic line, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And basically, kind of the iconography, the wardrobe. I knew that Hattie McDaniel won the Oscar for playing Mammy, and that's the sum total of my knowledge of Gone with the Wind. My wife and I both thought it was this big, sweeping Southern romance that was also about the Civil War and slavery somehow, and had become very problematic, especially in recent years. So, boy, were we wrong. Ben, what do you feel about, before we get into what's your history with Gone with the Wind, and where do you like what are your kind of high level thoughts on it?
Okay. Well, so I was born in Atlanta, where Margaret Mitchell was born, and Gone with the Wind was a ever present artifact, I guess, in my family growing up. Both my mom's family, who they're from Southern Louisiana, and my dad's family, that's sort of all over the place. But my dad and my mom and most of the people in the South and everyone in Atlanta had kind of latched on to Gone with the Wind as one of the great and important stories. And I'm going to talk about my own feelings in a minute, but I'm just giving you mine. Okay. So I don't remember when I became aware of it. That's how interwoven it was in my childhood. I didn't watch it beginning to end till I was in my 20s. I did see it when I was a kid, but I couldn't ever, I mean, I love movies, but I wasn't able to sit still for 3 hours or whatever.
It's 4 hours long.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even, yeah. So I couldn't sit still for that long when I was a kid, but it's a big deal in the world. I have some anecdotes to share in a minute. It's a big deal in our country. It's a big deal in our history. And all of that it's even a bigger deal in the South. And so, and Margaret Mitchell is such a strange presence in American letters and cinema because she only wrote one novel. And so it's weird to have one novel be one of the best-selling novels in the history of the world It's so strange. But so the film, I watched it for the first time when I was 28, I believe, beginning to end. And the reason the novel has any importance for me is that my wife read it and liked it when she was a kid, and she grew up in the Chicago suburbs. And it's one of the reasons she decided to move to Atlanta after college. One of the like appeal of the South was this book, and that's where we met. So
Wow.
Yeah, the book has played a role in my life, even if I don't subscribe to the mythology of the book, right? So the problem with Gone with the Wind, you said my high level thoughts, but the problem is in a way quite simple. It's an artifact that a symbol. It's three things. It's a historical artifact. Mm-hmm. It's a symbol, and then it's also a film, right? A work of art. And as a film, it's a roaring success, right? It's an astonishing, the length of it, and yet it's compelling throughout, right? Like it works. So as a film, it's incredible. It's got great performances, and the MGM art design is like, incredible, right? As an artifact, it's troubling and complex and tied to the novel, right? But as a symbol, it's incredibly disturbing because bad people, basically, not bad people, people who want to idealize slavery have grabbed on and glommed on to this book, right? Back both then and now. And Pat Conroy, who a liberal guy, and he wrote a bunch of novels that were made into films. He has this book called My Reading Life, which I read randomly about a year ago. And he talks about how Gone with the Wind was the biggest influence on him as a novelist. His mother loved it. And it was it was like a driver of their family in a lot of ways. And I have this quote from him. I wrote it down. The book Gone with the Wind shaped the South I grew up in more than any other book. What Mitchell caught so perfectly was the sense of irredeemable loss and of a backwater Camelot corrupted by the mannerless intrusions of insensate invaders. The Iliad with a Southern accent, burning with humiliation. And I think the movie. Okay, I know you have stuff to say, but let me just say
I'm here for a conversation. I'm anxious to hear your thoughts on it, because mine are not fully formed.
All right, so he has. I have it's a long quote. I'm not going to read all of it, but basically he goes through how this was he calls it the last great posthumous victory of the Confederacy, right? And he's not the only one who says that. Pat Conroy, like the novel was such a big seller, and Southerners glommed onto it first, and it was out of that kind of revisionist, those Southern revisionists who tried to recast the Civil War as something beyond just the power politics of slavery, right? Being like allowed into the future states or being outlawed, right? Like, so they tried to recast the Civil War. So the book comes out of that. And the criticism of the film, I think, is twofold. The problems with the film are twofold. One, it could not fully escape from the subject matter. Like David Selznick, who was the producer, and he was a super hands-on producer, he did not want to make a racist film. He had passed on remaking Birth of a Nation, which was the first blockbuster. He passed on it. He didn't want to do it. He was like, I don't have anything to do with that. So he wasn't unaware of the power and damage of the movie could cause, right? So he wanted to make sure that the movie did not demonize Black people, Black citizens during Reconstruction. It does a little bit of that, but he was really aware of that.
Well, I mean, you're talking about the one scene pretty much with the carpetbagger, right? Or
yes.
Other instances, yeah.
Yeah, and he says, and he wrote in a memo, I think we have to be awfully careful that the Negroes come out decidedly on the right side of the ledger. Now, we don't use that term anymore, but the point is he was trying to, he knew that the book was problematic. And so that's part one, right? The movie absorbs inherently. The movie and the novel have become intermingled.
Well, let me pull over. I want to pull over just a second before you get to the second point, because I think that's very important. In terms of my sense of the film, your wife read the novel. I can't remember. Did you say that you have read the novel subsequently to seeing the film?
I read her letters, a lot of her letters, and some of her other work. I didn't read. I missed out my time when I was interested. I was never interested in like historical romances or historical novels, and so I've just it's such a long novel with so much baggage. I read all the time, but I can't like on a Thursday afternoon, but I'm gonna crack open Gone with the Wind. So I mean, no, I haven't read.
The reason I bring that up is I want to know, maybe your wife has a sense of this, or maybe you've picked up on it. How different, I guess, thematically and in terms of these kind of racial issues, is the novel from the book? Sorry, the novel from the movie.
So there's a scene, there's one crucial scene where Scarlett wants believe a character is insolent towards her after the war, and she says something to the effect in her mind, I wish we were back when I could have, like, this person could have been whipped for that, like if it was a black character.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's she comes out of the novel is saying it was better when the South had slavery and plantations and the North just left them alone. And so that's a very, very tough beginning point for any work of art, right? I mean, that's a tough, and it's not just the character. I know what you mean. Like you can write a great novel about like racist characters. I think novelists are actually scared to do that anymore. But the book itself, right? The book itself is doing that.
Well, and that's kind of my question, because, and we'll get into this. I don't think the movie has that same attitude.
No,
and that's kind of one of the distinctions I'm trying to make is I understand the novel was insanely successful. The film, up until I think James Cameron came along with Titanic, was the #1 film of all time for 6 decades or whatever it was.
A 4-hour movie about like a gun runner and a plantation owner. I mean, it's crazy.
Right. So what I'm saying is that doesn't happen if the only people buying tickets are Southerners.
No,
something captured a popular imagination, worldwide, essentially. So I'm just trying to figure out, is there something in the novel that didn't translate to the film? Because when I talk about the movie and that I don't want to necessarily say, well, I don't think the movie is particularly racist, so the novel can't be. The novel could very well have.
It is.
The scene you described is troubling. Yes.
I mean, so, well, okay. I think I know why the movie's popular, but let me speak to this. My sort of second thing I was trying to say is that I believe the movie, it has undeniable power, symbolic power and real power, in our country, because it's 80 years old, right? Or something. It's about 80 years old. And Donald Trump, when he was on the campaign trail in running against Joe Biden, and COVID is like here. And I used to play this when I would do talks and stuff. He is, when Parasite wins Best Picture, he's at a rally and he says, well, what the hell is this all about? Let's get Gone with the Wind. Can we get Gone with the Wind back, please? And like everyone's cheering. Yeah. And that's crazy. That is crazy. And by the way, I have nothing but disdain for that guy, but his using that as like a cultural sort of signpost, or like, it's not weird. An 80-year-old movie. I mean, there's only a few films that translate like that,
Yeah.
And so the movie has this power that I think some of it's actually hard to get at why it has so much power. But so this gets to my second point, right? It's used in a lot of negative ways. And people on Twitter who aren't film critics, who aren't scholars, I'm not a scholar, but who aren't academics, I'm not an academic either, but like non-film people often group Gone with the Wind in with Birth of a Nation and some other like racist Hollywood films. And they do it casually, right? And so what ends up happening is Gone with the Wind has also accrued some baggage that's not really there. I mean,
right. And this kind of gets to the heart of my confusion coming out of that 4-hour film. I think this is a brilliant movie. I think it's a masterpiece. I think it deserves all the acclaim that it's gotten, but I'm confused as to that acclaim and why, to sort of your point, people who are, contemporary racists or want to recapture the better days, as it were,
right.
Would glom onto this movie, because this is not a flattering movie
They haven't
to the
watched it.
South.
They haven't watched it.
Right. And here's the thing. There was audible groans and boos in the theater I went to. And now consider we went to a 1 o'clock in the afternoon showing on a Thursday.
Okay.
The place was pretty packed. We were
That's
surprised.
Right.
And a lot of the audience, I mean, there were people who were saying, "Oh yeah, I saw this the last time it was here." I'm like, wow. But the disclaimer pops up before. That's the first thing we see on the screen, is the now famous disclaimer. Like when HBO Max or whatever pulled this film from their library and then popped it back up later once they had a disclaimer saying, stuff like the racist views of this movie and all this other stuff, and it's presented, and we're presenting it contemporarily, but things were different back then. Right. People were booing that, and I think I didn't quite understand it in full until after I saw the movie. They weren't booing it because they're like, how dare you, say something against our inherent racism. It was that this is not a racist movie. There is racism in it.
Right.
And I know the criticism that it doesn't sufficiently portray the horrors of slavery, but that's not what it's about.
Correct.
It's about the people who own those slaves, and it's not kind to them, just as history has not been.
Right.
I think it's kind of perfect because the slavery element is out of sight, out of mind to them, just as it kind of has to be for the audience. And it's still a puzzlement to me. I don't think a lot of the people who reference Gone with the Wind as some kind of like a champion, homage to the South have watched it, or even if they have watched it, they haven't understood it, which is baffling.
They haven't watched it, right? They haven't watched it, and the people who associate it and connected to Birth of a Nation haven't watched. They probably haven't watched either film. They've seen highlights on YouTube, probably. They've might have seen it when they were kids or in a film studies class in college or something, but they haven't looked at it closely. That's what I come to the same conclusion. I mean, I think the movie's power for me is the character of Scarlett O'Hara, who is a singular character, wonderful character. Vivien Leigh does a great job, and her story arc, where she's vain and petty and small-minded and spoiled, right? And then goes through the horror of the war and becomes not a saint, but becomes a kind of ambitious, indomitable force for, a new pragmatic, I don't know, Southern capitalism, or I don't know, I'm not phrasing it correctly, but her character is incredible.
Yeah. I mean, I was not ready for this film on so many different levels, because there's a part of me.
Yeah.
Well, no, go ahead, finish your thought.
No, it's just funny because it's such a well-known film, but I get your point. It's a well-known film, but I mean, a lot of people haven't seen it anymore. I mean,
Well, there's talk about, and I've discussed this on different episodes of this show in recent years, but there's a narrative now that, the strong, independent, kick-ass woman is a relatively new phenomenon in cinema.
Nope.
But it's not. And I was not expecting, of all films, Gone with the Wind to be one of the earliest examples that we have.
Yeah.
Because Scarlett O'Hara, as we meet her in the opening film, she's being courted by these different kind of brain dead, horny suitors. She is spoiled. The movie knows that she's spoiled and makes fun of her. I mean, it's going to sound terrible, but for years, because I knew nothing about the film, I knew that Hattie McDaniel had won the Oscar for playing the maid, essentially. I was like, how is that possible? Because I would have thought, because of the reputation of this film, that she was maybe a side character with like 5 lines
Right.
or something. But no, she's an integral part of the
Sure.
story, and she appears throughout the film and she grows along with the characters. But what I loved is that, she gives like a lot of the, it's going to sound weird, a lot of the racism, the overt racism in this movie is her openly calling people in the house that she works in white trash. And
Right.
not, and not getting, yelled at or reprimanded or whipped or anything for it, because she is part of the family. I understand that is also one of the criticisms of the movie, is that it kind of romanticizes the relationship of these, the people who are working in the house with the people who own the house. But yeah, so but when Scarlett O'Hara, by the end of the film, she is a tragic character. She's a damaged character. She's kind of an awful person, along with
Right.
Rhett Butler. So, and he mentions this, they find each other and they're sort of dancing around this romance, but they're both kind of scummy people, and that's why that is their attraction in a way. But she comes to own her own business. She shoots a Yankee soldier in the
Yeah.
face who's about to do
Yeah.
some awful things to her.
It's a good
I mean,
scene. Yeah.
she's a take charge, incredible character. And I feel like if this movie didn't have the baggage that it does, you could show Gone with the Wind, yes, a 4-hour movie in the age where there are Avengers movies and Avatar 2, which are like 3 hours long.
Right.
You pop an intermission in there, you could put this up. I think people would lose their shit. Yes, of course, over the racial themes, but over the portrayal of Scarlett O'Hara as this fierce character from
Yeah.
80 years ago.
And it's a better movie than those other films, but
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
for sure. What people talk, well, we've lost our, I have it in The South Never Plays Itself, but The Little Foxes and Jezebel both came out around the same time. Jezebel stars Betty Davis, who was supposed to be Scarlett O'Hara. She was Katharine Hepburn, Betty Davis, a whole bunch of actresses were up for it. Paulette Goddard and Joan Crawford were all like in the running. Okay. But Betty Davis stars in Jezebel, and she's also a very similar character. I mean, they were trying to like steal Gone with the Wind's, market or commerce. So it came out a year earlier, but same thing. She's in charge of everything. She's driving the plot. She's a very complicated character. And then Little Foxes, also Betty Davis, a couple years later, same thing. She's driving the plot. She's the most interesting character on screen. She gets all the great lines. So, I mean, yeah, I think that there's this notion that because of the 90s and the early 2000s, when there were no good roles for women, especially the early 2000s, I look back and I'm like, what happened? Right? I mean, just what happened? But this one is singular because she's such a great character. And that's like, I mean, she's so complicated. And because she's sort of a villain, not a villain, but she's not a nice person. She's ahead of like Tony Soprano, right? Or Vic Mackey on The Shield, or Don Draper. She's like a little bit of everything. And Rhett Butler's a great character. And he's a sort of roue and a rake and cynical and detached, and he doesn't really care about anybody. And he kind of becomes a more romantic. He changes. He's a sort of a bit of a better man at the end of the movie in a way. But like, it's a great performance from Clark Gable. He's perfect.
The early scenes where they're having this kind of non-flirt, it's very much like a Han Solo Princess Leia kind of like, we're attracted but we also kind of hate each other.
Right.
That's wonderful. Like their intro scene where she throws the dish at the painting, and then he pops up from the couch because she had just been rebuffed by this person that she liked, and he's like, well, that was interesting. But then by the end of the film, after they've been through all of this mess together, including the birth and death of a child, spoiler alert, I didn't understand the gravity of "Frankly, My Dear, I Don't Give a Damn" until I saw at the end of Gone with the Wind, because it's a pop culture
Right.
staple,
Yeah.
but it's a powerful line
Oh yeah.
because they've been through so much together. And he's just, he kind of grows up, becomes an adult when he has a daughter. Now there's that weird kind of line where he says, she's all mine, or she belongs to me, or something like that. But he says it in an affectionate way. I didn't get like a creepy, like power hungry vibe from it. I get the feeling that, he owns a lot of stuff because he's a millionaire,
Right.
or we're led to believe. But he falls so in love with his daughter, and it's a pure love that he never quite found with Scarlett O'Hara, that when she dies and he's still playing second fiddle in Scarlett's heart to oh my god, Ashley, the
Right.
was that, yeah, the other kind of southern aristocrat who went to
Sure.
fight in the war. He's just like, I'm out of here, I'm done. And Scarlett, who suddenly realizes after Ashley has finally confessed that he doesn't love her, after her daughter dies and all this other stuff, she's finally like, oh, I actually do. I actually am in love with Rhett Butler. And he's like, no, I'm gone. And she's like, what am I going to do with my life? And he says, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And then he leaves. The entire theater applause. Like even the people who couldn't stand up properly tried to stand up so they could give an ovation.
It's incredible. It's incredible. Yeah. So I think that they're the characters with the great performances from the two leads, but the whole cast is really strong. Thomas Mitchell, Olivia de Havilland, and then the MGM art design, the costumes and the sets. MGM didn't have any of the grubby little tiny movies. They didn't have any. There's no auteur in MGM, not really, right? It's all by assembly. But when the assembly's working, I mean, they're incredible films. A lot of them, and this movie. It's funny because David Selznick, he hired a bunch of different screenwriters to work on this, and the first one was a guy named Sidney Howard, who was a playwright, and he did the treatment. And he said, like, there's a lot of story here to do, right? So he did a treatment, and Selznick was kind of like, I don't know. And Selznick was a notorious micromanager who would give notes. There's like I want to say there's a few million memos he gave. Like there's so many notes and memos. But so he took the treatment, hired some guys to write it. A whole bunch of different writers came through. Donald Ogden Stewart wrote on it for a while. He was a pretty well-known screenwriter. And then Alfred Hitchcock gave notes. He was in town for Rebecca, and Selznick produced Rebecca. So Alfred Hitchcock gave notes on. He was like, "Hey, Alfred, could you like take a look at the screenplay?" So he gave notes on it, and then finally Ben Hecht, who was a great screenwriter, Victor Fleming, and David Selznick went into it. They squirreled away into a hotel room, I believe, and living on Benzedrine, bananas, and peanuts. They ground it out over a week. Yeah. No, this is fact, right? Oh. And Victor Fleming bursts a blood vessel in his eye. He was working so hard. Selznick like passed out on the couch. And so, but out of that sort of crucible, they reduced the story, and they like got it, right? And so the movie in some ways is a miracle that a good film came out of all of this. With George Cukor was the first director, and he got fired. Not because he was the movie just wasn't shooting fast enough. They didn't like what they were seeing, so Selznick got rid of him. It wasn't because the rumor is that Gable didn't like it. But that's, I don't think that's the case. Victor Fleming comes in, a great assembly line director, and he makes it, but you have all these casting decisions that are made. And so the fact that the movie is a bit of a miracle, that out of all of that comes a very tight, okay, it's really long, but a very sort of tightly woven film.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, the intermission happens. It's weird because I would almost think it's a criticism because it was kind of predictable, but the intermission happens just at almost the precise 2-hour mark, where sort of the all is lost on the plantation moment. You've got Scarlett standing there kind of in silhouette, like saying, as God is my witness, I will, rebuild.
I'll never go hungry again. Right.
I'll never go hungry again. Right.
Incredible scene. Yeah.
And then it breaks, and you come back, and it kind of becomes a completely different type of film.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I love, is because you've got this sort of fantasy of the South. You've got it, crumbling under the boot of the Yankees, and it's like, okay, so where do people go from here? It's a long kind of tough road, and people have to step outside what they were accustomed to and just sort of build something else and
Yeah.
something different. And the characters get much darker. There's not a lot of humor in the second half of this thing, and that, I think, is part of its impact.
It's funny when you say that. It reminds me of Wizard of Oz, because the first half of the movie is like charming and funny and great songs, and then basically they hit Oz, and then the movie, it's like a horror movie for kids. There's flying monkeys. There's no songs anymore. The witch is destroying people, and
And that, what's you say a miracle, I think it's miraculous that this and Victor Fleming's other movie from 1939 was The Wizard of Oz. Like,
yeah,
how
and
do
that's
both these
unbelievable.
movies made from the same person come out in the
Yeah,
same year? It's
it's old
unthinkable.
Hollywood. I know it's old Hollywood though, because it's astonishing, and he doesn't ever get his proper due, because critics are all about the auteur theory, and he's not an auteur, right? So he gets kind of left out of that paradigm, right? So his value, like Michael Curtiz, who's another great director, who
Oh
made
yeah.
1,000 great films, but he's not an artist in the way that these critics have said, right? They're technically almost perfect, right?
Curtiz is another one of those. Yeah, he's kind of like the Coen brothers, just in the sense that you ask, about his filmography, you can't say, oh, he's done, a dozen of this genre of films, sort of all over the place.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love
one of the
that.
great musicals, one of the great gangster films, some of the great dramas, right? He's some of the great crime pictures. So he's special. But Fleming's another one, and it's funny. The first half and the second half, when that happens, Gone with the Wind's really adept at doing that, and the epic sweep of it, you buy into it. In other film, it Wizard of Oz too, but in other films, when that happens, it always leaves me shaken and a little chilled. Like, and I don't always like it when there's a tonal shift like that.
For me,
Um,
the most jarring example in a negative way of that was Tarantino's The Hateful Eight.
I didn't
Um,
like that film either. I like Tarantino, but that movie I hated. So,
yeah, I'm a huge Tarantino fan, and I love the first half of it, but then, like,
yeah,
the intermission, because it was at the Music Box during their roadshow thing, I came back and was like, what the hell happened to the movie I was just watching? Because
yeah,
this ain't
no,
it.
it's bad. And that one is interesting. Yeah, I mean, that one's an interesting failure. Like, I'm like intrigued enough by that movie to even write about it, but I thought it was, for him especially, dreadful for what you're saying. The movie doesn't like hold. It seems to hold together, but it doesn't. And okay. So to bring it back to Gone with the Wind, right? These epic films go wrong so often. There, a lot of them are unwatchable. I tried to watch that Boris Pasternak movie adaptation, the Russian novel. I'll think of the name in a minute. Not War and Peace, but the about the well, whatever. I'll think of it in a minute. Yeah, it's a good director, right? Good writer, great cast. I'm like, this is just boring me to tears. Exodus is another one with Otto Preminger about the founding of Israel, right? Like, almost unwatchable. And everything about it works. It's got a star that, Paul Newman. It's got great music. It's got a good director. And so that's another way Gone with the Wind is exceptional, because a lot of times epics, they don't age well either. Like, can you think of a movie like this that's come out in the last 20 years that you would watch again or recommend to somebody? No.
RRR. No,
Well, we're on different camps in that one, even
I
though,
know, I
yeah,
know.
that was an epic. No, that's a big movie. I was really going with just American films.
Yeah.
There are some good ones, I guess, that are watchable. They tend to be war movies. I guess The Thin Red Line, but it's not the scale of Gone with
Well,
the Wind.
right. I've watched. It's tough because, like, Saving Private Ryan, it has that kind of epic sweep to it, and some other Spielberg films, but there's no, like, romance to it. I mean,
Correct.
the only, I would think, and this is sort of an undiscussed one, for several reasons, I think, but Mel Gibson's Hacksaw Ridge,
Yeah.
I thought was a great kind of epic, and there is some romance in there, but it's sort of towards the beginning before, and Andrew Garfield goes off to war. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely something missing here. One thing I wanted to discuss real quick, kind of related to this, the epicness and the romance. The poster, I think, is so misleading. That
Yeah.
epic picture of Clark Gable and Vivian Lee. Vivian Lee, I had like a crazy crush on both of these characters, like watching this movie. I was like,
Yeah.
I would love them to lead everything. Vivian
Yeah.
Lee's right eyebrow should have gotten an Oscar.
Right.
But the two of them on the poster together, like, oh, this is why for 40 years or whatever, since I was aware of this movie, I thought it was a big sweeping romance. That particular scene, based strictly on the wardrobe, because there's only one scene in which he wears that kind of like a torn white collared shirt. It's when he pulls her in and forcibly kisses her, and she's not into it. I'm like, out of all the scenes you could have picked to represent their troubled romance, you had to pick the one that was most Me Too-ish. That's so strange.
It is weird. No, for sure. Yeah, I don't know why. I mean, I imagine the back office MGM people, because they distributed it, I'm sure they were like, we got to highlight the romance of these two hot stars, I have a couple of anecdotes I wanted to share with you
Please do.
about them. Okay. A couple of things. One, Clark Gable, who is an actor that I like, and he's interesting, and he's in a lot of good films. A lot of people don't know this, or it's forgotten. He's the basis of the character that Jack Palance plays in The Big Knife. And in that movie, Jack Palance is a star who's troubled, and it comes out that he killed a woman in a drunk driving accident, and a mid-level MGM executive took the blame and went to prison for him. This is true. This happened. Clark Gable killed a woman in a drunk driving accident, not on purpose. I mean, right. And another guy, to save the studio needed him, so they set up another guy to take the blame. Then the next film Clark Gable took was It Happened One Night, which he became basically a household name, right? But there's another America out there in the multiverse, I guess, where he goes to prison. And then you have Errol Flynn or Ronald Coleman, who were the two of the names mentioned. They would have butchered the film. Neither of them would have been good at it. Maybe Errol Flynn. But, and so there's interesting, I don't know, I always struck me as interesting. The second anecdote has nothing to do, it was about the book, but I can't help but share it. So Paul Theroux is a writer who wrote Dark Star Safari, and in it, he recreates a trip he took in Africa a long time ago. Okay, the book came out 10 years ago, something. One of the guys he meets on the trip is an Ethiopian who was a political prisoner in an Ethiopian prison. And it's horrible, right? And there's nothing to do, and you're mistreated. And the only thing to read in the prison was a contraband copy of Gone with the Wind. That's the only book they had in this prison. So the prisoners would share this book to read, and they would keep it hidden. And so this guy who was there for years, the only thing he had to do to keep him going was he was translating it one page at a time onto these little pages out of the cigarette packs. And that's how the book got translated into Amharic. That's how it got translated into Ethiopian.
That I have a copy of George Orwell's handwritten notes and original draft of 1984. It's basically a giant coffee table book of like photographs, right, of these notes. I would love to see the cigarette back translations of this. Is this in an archive somewhere? Do you know, like, whatever happened to this, or is it just lost to the annals of being a story?
I mean, Paul Theroux, he's a great writer, but he's not like a historian. I mean, this is just a guy I met. I bet it exists somewhere, but I just thought this was incredible. And anyway, the guys, Pat Conroy, who I quoted earlier, said that anyone who's been in a war, anyone who's lost a war will love the novel or find themselves in the novel and in the movie. right? He says this. And I think the Ethiopian guy also felt that way, right? And I do think part of the appeal is I mean, I've criticized the movie myself along cultural lines, but as a story, that these various characters go through this horrible war and come out they come out the other side of it and recreate themselves. It's haunting and enduring, but also it's rousing stuff. And when I mentioned the other epics that don't quite make it, like Saving Private Ryan, it takes place over like a week, and it doesn't follow the characters later. Okay, Best Years of Our Lives, which is, okay, it's not a new movie. It's from the 48 or something. Best Years of Our Lives, epic film about soldiers who come back from the war. And it just follows their everyday lives. Have you seen this movie?
No.
Oh, well, it's great. But
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
It just follows them trying to rebuild. And it's only one half of Gone with the Wind, right? The second half. And I feel like a lot of movies are one half or the other. And what makes it, unique is that it gives you this incredible. Dr. Zhivago, by the way, Dr. Zhivago.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's bad. I mean, I say I want to like it. It has bits that are fine. It's good director, but
I don't think I've made it all the way through that one.
It's hard to do a movie like this. That's my point. I mean, near impossible. And part of the magic. And I don't think anyone can. I do think it comes out of the characters, but part of the magic of the film is that it manages to pull it off.
Yeah, I mean, there is a weird morality problem around, kind of celebrating Gone with the Wind. And I understand that. I am half Black, heritage wise, but I never had that kind of cultural Black experience where I've talked to people about Gone with the Wind who've been kind of troubled by it, or whatever. But it's a strange thing to try and reconcile, because there are people who are upset over it, the same people who would revere this movie as a cultural artifact. I wonder if they have the same problem who criticize this movie in a lot of ways. Maybe they haven't watched it, because I don't know that you can come away from this movie and think of it as a celebration of the people who perpetuated slavery. It's kind of a weird, it's a condemnation of that. Now, they don't get their kind of cultural comeuppance. And at the end, you kind of, based on the kind of character that Scarlett O'Hara is, that she's presented over these years in this 4-hour film, you kind of get this sense that it's going to be difficult for her, but she is going to, I hate to use this phrase, rise again. But it's not, it's not like there's a fist waving, we got to get slavery back kind of message at the end of this film. The movie's just not about that. And I can understand it'd be kind of troubling, but, a couple of bits of weird context to it. And this is not a new idea, but, slavery it's not a uniquely American phenomenon. And that doesn't make it right, but it is the people of that time and earlier times, up until essentially we ended slavery when it had the big war to wipe it off of America's books. It was a global phenomenon. I mean, it's still going on in some parts of the world, and that's sort of a credit to the people who fought and died for it and upheld it all these decades, is that we're trying to be that beacon of hope and promise. But the other kind of weird aspect to it is, I look at the people who are, on Terra, the giant plantation, and Gone with the Wind. I think, how could they not think about the plight of the people that they have enslaved, the people that are working for them, even though they do have this sort of familiar relationship with Mammy and Prissy and some of the other, house staff. They don't really consider them part of the family. I get the feeling that if there was any kind of like real uprising on their part, they got too far out of line, they'd be put back in their place. And I wonder, how could that happen? And then I think about where we are today, and like the technology that you and I are talking on, the devices we carry around in our pocket, in a lot of cases, are made by slave labor. Now, the difference is They're slaves in countries that we don't have to think about, we don't have to see. The story is about suicide nets around the Apple, like Foxconn, factories, is at least 10 years old. And there are a surge.
Punchlines for jokes, by the way. Right.
Punchlines for jokes.
Punchlines for a lot of jokes too.
Right.
Late night TV, comedians, everyone made a lot of hay out of that without realizing these are they're so miserable. Right. They're trying to kill themselves.
So that we can we can watch YouTube videos.
Correct.
More conveniently. And the assurances from Apple and these other companies, like, oh, we got rid of the nets, we've improved conditions. I mean, I don't care if you got rid of the nets. Did you get rid of the reasons that people wanted to use them? Right. So my question is, 80 years from now, are people going to be making movies about this period of our time? And is there going to be social outrage from the descendants of the people who are making these devices saying, how could you carry on and not think about the consequences of all this stuff that you were enjoying in luxury? So that's why one of the reasons I can't get that upset about a movie like Gone with the Wind, I was like, because we are all guilty of ignoring things, whether they're right in our faces or, thousands of miles away. And it's almost worse when it's 1,000 miles away.
Yeah. There's a line, I don't remember who said it, but, every day I'm implicated in the cruelties of the world just by being alive, right? And it's true that we will be. I mean, I'll go you one further and say that historians, a few hundred years hence, will study the United States as a factory for serial killers, right? I mean, we have so many here. Here's us, and then here's everyone else. India, I think, second, and then way down. And that's so disturbing. Like, what is going on in our country that we are producing one after another of these dangerous serial murderers, right? And I don't know the answer, but I'm saying that the mining of the rare minerals in the Congo, Congo. I had a friend from there I played soccer with, and even he lived here. He was divorced from the misery and the reality there. He didn't want to talk about it. He didn't know. He was like, he had an iPhone. He was like, I don't, because I asked him, I was like, how bad is it, right? And he was like, I just, And so I agree, but I think, but here it's tricky because there won't be any films made about that. There'll be documentaries. I mean, but there was that. There was that weird stop motion about the Belgian. What was it called? Piece of Cake or something like that. I mean, but there won't be this kind of money and class put into an epic film about the owners of lithium mines in African countries.
Well, but here's the thing. I'm not even saying that you need to. I'm saying that, take a movie like The Social Network or any of those movies about, a great film, or any of those, biopics about Steve Jobs and the rise of Apple. Right. Someone who is a descendant of the people who are making the devices, right? The people, I think one of those Jobs movies came out around the time that the Foxconn controversy happened. If they were to come out, or their descendants later, and say, you're making a movie about a guy who was making a product based on something that killed 80 members of my family.
So many people, right?
It's so I'm not saying you have to have a movie that's explicitly about someone who owns a factory and the horrible conditions, much in the same way that with Gone with the Wind, that slavery, the enslavement, of the people there. There are a couple of scenes where you see them coming in from the fields or talking in the fields, and it's like, oh yeah, that's what this whole thing is built on, which I think is good for the context of people watching the film. But It doesn't get to the horrors that you'd see in like 12 Years a Slave, and that kind of a deal. But it doesn't have to be, and it's more chilling when you think, oh, this is just a happy-go-lucky movie or a drama where you're really supposed to care about, is Steve Jobs gonna make it and become this influential designer who gets all these devices in the hands of millions of people all the world over and makes them so addicted that they have to get the new one year after year, which means it's going to be harder on the people making them.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fascinating point. I guess I hadn't connected it to our contemporary times, really. I think we I mean, I think films, I think to the films, racism or non-racist, like you can watch a movie from 20 years ago and it will blister your eyeballs with the values, right? And the a different kind of racism, different types of racism on display. And you can watch a movie made right now that will be criticized because of the point of view that it focuses on 15 years from now. Right. So it's, I mean, in a way it's easy. In a way it's easy bait. It's an easy game to play now, I think, in a way. But I think what you're talking about is a serious, like it's like a serious beef with popular entertainment in a way, if you expect too much of it. Right. I say in the book, in The South Never Plays Itself, that it's a great film, but bad history. Right. And I'm okay with that. I can accept like that a movie can't either doesn't want to be or can't be both. Right. But a movie can be a good film and cause a lot of harm that Gone with the Wind is not causing. I don't think, right? Itself. People are like using it for harmful things. But unlike Birth of a Nation, which is truly outrageous,
it is outrageous, but it also, I think, can be appreciated on several levels as an artistic achievement.
Sure, but
well, here's the thing: like between the time that we've spoken to each other, I developed a kind of a relationship and a friendship with Armand White, the controversial film critic, who has challenged me on a number of things. One was to watch Birth of a Nation, and then Griffith's follow-up film Intolerance. I think we watched one other. But to talk about them, because I had just, like a lot of people, I had heard the reputation of the film. I'm like, it's going to be, people parading, well, swastikas weren't a thing back when that came around, but just parading Klan robes and hoods, and there's no story. It's just all like rah, rah, rah white people. And it's a more complicated story than that, right? And it's something that I think if more people, like with Gone with the Wind, were challenged to actually sit down and watch the material and think about it before they open their mouths or their Twitter accounts, then the conversation would be a lot different.
They're never going to do that.
Yeah.
But Twitter's not, I mean, we're not like set up that way. I was just drawing a contrast though between the two films. I actually don't mean to bring up Birth of a Nation, because part of the problem is it keeps getting brought up when Gone with the Wind gets, because they cover the same time period basically. But I mean, when we do that, again, if someone were like critiquing The Menu and brought up a movie from like 1995, right? That's like what you're doing, which is, who would do that? Like, you wouldn't talk about Seven. You would go, oh, The Menu, but it's like Seven or something. I mean, it's weird, right? But I was just saying, I was trying to draw, though, a distinction between like depictions in the film, because Selznick he was, I mean, in his way, for the time period, he was very, he was pretty sensitive to this.
Well, that's the other thing, is that you think about this movie that has this, horribly racist reputation. It was a product of its time, but it was also a product of Hollywood, which, even today, when I hear people talk about like, oh, Hollywood's racist past and all the terrible things that people before were doing, and they're referencing things from 20 years ago, I'm like, well, aren't you the same crowd that was in charge 20 years ago? Like, where is this this awakening or this wokeness or whatever coming from? It seems like a lot of weird butt covering.
Well, they have money. There's money in it now, so they're going to like move towards it. I think. I think Hollywood did no better or no worse. Probably better than other segments of our country, and worse a little bit in a few ways. But
I just read before he jumped on, I was looking up Hattie McDaniel and her Oscar speech, which is, I'll actually link to it below. It's really something.
It is.
But
something.
The fact that she was not, this is liberal Hollywood, then she was nominated for and won an Academy Award, a historic achievement. She was still not allowed to sit with the rest of the cast of Gone with the Wind at the ceremony.
And she wasn't invited to the premiere in Atlanta. And Clark Gable, to his credit, wasn't going to go. and she talked to him and said, "Look, you got to go. We all need the movie to do well, you know." But can you imagine that conversation? I mean, you know, but she knew she was, but it's funny, right? She was very canny. I mean, very famously said, "Hey, I'd rather play a maid than be one."
Yeah.
Like, you know, I didn't invent the world. I live in it. And I'm, you know, she had talent, a lot of talent. But your heart breaks when you think about the other film roles that people like Hattie McDaniel didn't get. I mean, because they were consigned to porters and maids and you know, babysitters and that, you know, whatever, that kind of stuff. But great role, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, and she's remembered. How many actresses are remembered from 1939, right? That aren't the 4 or 5 marquee names. None, but Hattie McDaniel, right? So it's like this. I don't know. I don't know what that means. You know,
I don't either. It's, but
I mean,
but I'm
maybe
glad,
nothing.
well, but I'm glad we're having this conversation, because if folks out there are watching this and you haven't seen Gone with the Wind, you know, I'm not going to criticize you for once, because usually I'm like, why are you watching this? But I think it's a movie that more people should see and have to kind of wrestle with, because it's not an easy film to discuss or even to think about, for all the reasons we've laid out here, and I think more. But I think, you know, I do want to kind of wrap up here.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts on Gone with the Wind before we talk about something else, something for the future?
I'll say just a couple quick things. One, you should watch it in pieces. It's easier to watch it in 4 pieces or 2 pieces instead of trying to sit for the running time.
Maybe, let me cut in. Let me cut in.
Yeah.
Maybe. I actually thought about this too. I mean, if you can see it on a big screen,
of course,
I think you can go and see it, you know, in a theater, especially like an old art house theater. It's great.
I wish I could do that.
Well, you know, I don't think there'd be any revivals of the movie coming around anytime soon, but
no.
But the other thing is, I was thinking about like who's going to sit through a 4-hour movie, and I thought people binge like 8-hour Netflix series like in a weekend. You know, they'll sit down and they'll stay up all night to watch the latest, you know, Disney Plus show or whatever. So I think it can be done. It might just be a reframing of like, I'm not going to watch a 4-hour movie. I'm going to watch 4 Netflix episodes.
That's a good point. I mean, I guess I meant though that you're not locked into watching it in one lump, and you can take the intermission break and then pick it up. I watch long films that way only because my life is busy, and so that's the way to do it. Yeah. But 2, I would just say there's so many different ways to watch it. The easiest one is to try to like look for flaws and gaps from like 2023, and that's to miss. That's a form, to me it's almost myopic to miss the artistry and the talent and the music, which we didn't talk about, and the stunning cinematography and the technique and the technical know-how, and the, you know, all of that gets swept away when you're just like, you know, it says stuff that I think is kind of bad now. And I guess that temptation you should resist when you're watching an old film, you know, and you shouldn't let it get in the way. Let's put it that way.
Right. I think the biggest hurdle for a modern audience who hasn't seen this, and I don't want to disparage anybody, but is probably just pressing play. You know, just the idea of like, I'm not going to watch that movie. I've heard about it. But I mean, just to the artistry point, you know, my last kind of point here is there's a bit where Scarlett, I think, is walking through town. She's going to try and find a doctor because her sister-in-law is about to have a baby. We see, I think I'm getting this scene right, because there's a lot of the scenes in the long movie, but there's a scene where she encounters like bodies in the street, and the camera pans out and you see there's more bodies. And then by the time it gets to the full wide shot, it's the entire main street of the town is just littered with people who are dying, dead, in need of some kind of attention. And you realize this isn't digital. It's not a matte painting. It's a giant scene of like what has to be hundreds of extras, something I haven't seen contemporary except for RRR. Anyway,
right.
But no, so yeah, thanks, Ben, for talking about Gone with the Wind with me. I really enjoyed the movie. I enjoyed this conversation.
Me too, Ian.
I'm looking forward to a future conversations.
Yeah,
because you've got another book coming out at some point soon. Tell me about that.
So it's called The Bad Class, and it's the kind of punk the angry punk version of The South Never Plays Itself. It's only about 4 films, really. Class of 1984, Bad Boys, The Outsiders, and Repo Man. And it's about my childhood in Pensacola, Florida. And it's also about a friendship that enigmatically dissolved. And so it's about those things. Yeah, there's a personal component. There's yeah. So I've been haunted by, well, I watched Class of 1984 on TV when I was like 8. And I know it's a great sort of exploitation film, and I'm hoping I can come back and talk about it. So I won't talk about it long here, but I'll say it's a kind of vicious early 80s remake of Blackboard Jungle, but instead of the teacher kind of connecting with the street toughs and making a difference in their lives, it goes like horribly wrong. So that is the starting point, and then I walk through those films. There's some politics of the early 80s too, and I was a real young kid in the early 80s, but I watched all these films with a friend of mine who then sort of ghosted me. So that's like part of what the book's about.
Well, I can't wait to talk about it, and
I'll send you a copy. It's supposed to be fun.
Oh, awesome! Yeah, well, it's you don't have a release date for it yet, but I want to try and plan. I'm just kind of springing this on you now. I want to talk about, I don't know if we talk about the book first or if we like talk about the individual films leading into the book, or how we want to do it. Because I have not seen, I think of the 4 movies you mentioned, I think I've seen one. I've seen The Outsiders.
Right.
The others are going to be kind of, they're going to be first views for me. So we'll talk about this.
Let me just say, and for anyone listening, Bad Boys is as good a movie as you'll see. It is wonderful. It is not it's exploitative in a way. It's about juvenile delinquents in a juvenile delinquent center in Illinois, but it's got incredible performances and an A-list. It actually has A-list talent, even though unlike the other, even though it feels, it's really nasty, right? And it was on TV all the time when I was a kid. It was on TBS all the time, and then they just stopped showing it, right? It was like up there with like those Chuck Norris movies and Conan the Barbarian. It was like on a lot. So clearly they got it. Turner got it for like a cheap, right? And they would show it late at night. But so anyway, and I'm happy to come back and talk about any of the 4 or all 4, but all 4. Class of 1984, Bad Boys, The Outsiders is the one that everyone's seen. And then Repo Man, which is the weirdest, it's the kind of cultiest. A lot of people have seen that too. And then I have a kind of epilogue. So yeah, that's the book. And I hope it comes out soon. I mean, everything's in. It's just waiting for the publisher to, put it out and
publish it.
Publish it. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, man. We'll make some plans. We'll figure out the smartest way to tackle this.
I would love that.
I want to talk about all 4 of those and the book. So Ben Beard, thank you so much. The South Never Plays Itself is still on sale. I'm going to leave a link to it down in the description. So check that out. Ben, where can people keep up with what you're up to?
I'm not on Twitter because I think it's ruining our civilization, whatever we have left. And I have a website. I also have a blog that I have put on hold, but I have an essay that's going to be coming out soon. I mean, I have stuff that's going to be coming out. I'm working more on longer projects. So my online footprint is pretty spare. And I'm thinking that might be the smarter way to exist in the world. But if you look for me, I have, my website is bwbeard.com, but it's got some bunch of stuff on it, but that's where I'll be putting when the new books come out. Cause I have another book too, that's that should be I won't talk about it now, but not too long from now should also be coming out. So.
All right. Well, keep me posted and I'll keep posted. Everything.
Thanks,
so
buddy.
Thank you much. Take care and we'll talk soon.
I'm excited. All right. Thank you, man.
All right. Thank you. Bye.